Frame Raider.
1080 Avalanche, a fun snowboarding game with quirky but expected hijinks. There's some neat graphical detail with snow covering the player model in the rougher terrain. I can't say from what I've played that this game pulls off anything out of expectation, but it's a fun ride no less.
Continue.
18-wheeler American Pro Trucker, featuring the Radio Demon.
I'm making our deliveries on time, so hurry up and become...
What I gathered is you're supposed to deliver goods before the competition. It's very arcade-esque, and the presentation is similar to the Cruisin' series. Still, I didn't really see much value in this one. Even with its own set of quirky hijinks, it all felt run-of-the-mill in terms of what it tried to pull off. The concept just isn't the most interesting, and the gameplay doesn't really make up for it.
Continue.
2002 FIFA World Cup. There's a lot of soul to this game. The announcer seems genuinely invested, even making personalized comments on the players and actions in-game.
And that's played back out by the keeper.
The graphics are serviceable. It's more so the lighting here that manages to steal the show. The gameplay itself was responsive and enjoyable.
Continue.
2006 FIFA World Cup. Besides the graphics, which were significantly upgraded from the prior, what else I experienced here felt lacking in comparison. I'm sure the technicalities and sport development were given a solid rehash, but I wasn't feeling its character and soul, which, at least personally, is what would keep me coming back. It's a fairly realistic interpretation, but I feel they stopped at the gameplay without giving it as much charm. It didn't really have to, but if we're comparing this to the original, it's not much of an improvement.
Continue.
4x4 Evo 2. I don't think I've ever played a racer where they don't show you the car of choice during selection. Anywho, you race 4x4s in various set conditions that pretty much just check the box on what they had to do to seem vaguely interesting. The graphics are actually alright, but very repetitive, as are the landscapes, which is a problem when it comes to a racer. Controls are very stiff as well. If you ever get close to an environmental piece, chances are you're gonna get stuck. Rubber banding. There's a lot of that here.
Continue.
Adventures of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, Attack of the Twonkies. I own this game. I intended to review it at some point. I remember the teasers having graphics very reminiscent of the show, which was very impressive. The characters' pupils are definitely off, but everything else looks great. The gameplay as well seems promising, but the tutorial segment for the beginning is far, far too long. I'm talking like half an hour. I eventually gave up because I feel beyond all this, there's a quality experience that fans of the show must play. I hope. I really can't be sure. I'd love to revisit this someday.
Continue.
Adventures of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius Jet Fusion. Yeah, I can't say the same for this one at all. It looks like what a beta would be for Attack of the Twonkies. You know, it pretty much is since this came a year prior. The gameplay feels very similar to those Ty the Tasmanian Tiger games, and since those were designed for large open environments, I cannot say it feels good within the confines of a school. Wait, this was made by the same people who made Ty the Tasmanian Tiger? Well, I guess that answers some questions. Also, the bully from the show is given a totally unfitting voice actor change, which is not only off-putting, but highly annoying. You'll hear the same few one-liners over and over, and this repeats for multiple of the same unexplained clones.
This bomb's got your name on him, Neutron. This bomb's got your name on him. This bomb's got your name. This bomb's got your name.
I get it!
Continue.
Aggressive Inline. This is a skating game. I'm sure you needed me to tell you that. I don't think I've ever played a game that felt both equally functional and broken at the same time. The heck's going on with her hair? It's pretty fun to pull off some slick tricks in the city, get some air and all that good stuff. This one gave me a so bad it's good vibe.
Continue.
Alien Hominid. One of those rare situations where a Newgrounds game made it to console. Hell, one of the rare situations where a game designed on Flash made it to console. If you ever wanted to play the embodiment of early 2000s Newgrounds, then this is definitely the go-to experience. Unnecessary gore, one-tone characters, and an environment made up of mostly glorified shapes. The game is pretty fun, though it lacks depth and has some severe balancing issues. You could consider it a bit of a rage game, honestly, though I don't feel this has the same revisiting factor that others of this sort do. I really do admire the game for what it pulled off in what was mostly a corporate market, but it seems to be not much more than a Newgrounds game that was further expanded upon in order to be sold. But it's fine, and if you like the game, then that's awesome.
Continue.
All-Star Baseball 2002. So here's the first example of a sports series that we'll skip the middle entries of. We've got 2002 here, and my impression is this goes for a far more realistic approach. I can't say much about this, it is exactly as you'd expect. Nothing more or less. There's barely any energy here, just a run-of-the-mill baseball game. But being an early game in this generation, it was likely impressive for its time.
Continue.
All-Star Baseball 2004. Between 2002 and 2004, they've definitely made quality-of-life improvements to the presentation. In fact, everything I could say negatively about their first entry seems fixed up here, to the point where I don't even really have anything to complain about. It's not a bad one.
Continue.
Amazing Island. Now this is what I call a GameCube game. These sorts of games are exactly what I associate the GameCube with. Strangely experimental ideas full of colors and uncommon gameplay mechanics. That said, these games are often hit or miss, and this one's more of a miss than a hit, even though I'd still say it's worth a try. Basically, a darkness has covered an obscure forgotten world, and you are the only one who still believes in their mystic power used to get rid of the invading darkness. You even get a character creation tool which reminds me vaguely of Graffiti Kingdom. How do you get rid of this darkness? By playing Mario Party minigames. A lot of these lack proper introduction or explanation, relying mostly on trial and error. It's certainly an interesting game.
Continue.
American Chopper 2 Full Throttle. I don't claim to know anything about this show beyond that argument meme. Basically, here you're playing out a series of tasks as assigned by, I guess, your co-workers. You start off by proving you've still got it, collecting these bolts in an underpass. Haven't seen the show, but I imagine this isn't the type of things they're doing within it. The game feels like shovelware using an existing property, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if that was the case here. It's very uninteresting with a meh execution overall.
Continue.
Animal Crossing. You can't really just sum up a game like this, but in a nutshell, you create your own virtual life in a small town filled with animal neighbors. It goes for a very cute approach, despite its many aggressive undertones that seem to have been left exclusively in this entry for the series. Unlike the rest, it uses an acre system, which was for the most part left in due to the limitations of the Nintendo 64, where Japan originally got this game. Yes, this is more or less a Nintendo 64 port of the same game with a considerable amount of upgrades. Nothing here is to classify it as a next-gen game at the time. It didn't really manage to do anything outside of the original platform's limitations. Nonetheless, managing your digital life, collecting and exploring, getting to know your neighbors, it's a strangely gratifying experience that I've always had difficulty trying to explain. It's like the constant satisfaction of getting things done, which applies here in a video game format. I guess it's like real life, but far easier and more convenient. You don't have to leave your couch. Part of us likes to do that stuff in a lazy environment, I guess.
Continue.
Animaniacs: The Great Edgar Hunt. Some dude stole all the Oscars, Edgars. The blimp the villain takes off on crashes into the famous Warner Brothers water tower, which is the home of the three troublemakers. Somehow, despite being all together, the three are separated as soon as the game begins. You're greeted by Woody, who tells you how to find your little sister Dot. On your way, you'll complete various tasks in return for Oscar prizes, very akin to Super Mario 64's Stars. Why? Hell if I know. At least for the introduction to this game, there's very little in terms of explanation. Thankfully, the gameplay is entertaining and very faithful to the source material. I can imagine this being a fun distraction.
Continue.
Ant Bully. Didn't work properly on the emulator, so I had to transfer over to console. Outside of making this video, it wasn't worth it, unfortunately. Basically, the game consists of doing ant things for the ants because after bullying them for so long, you've been shrunk down and now have to form some kind of new respect for them. In return for doing some ant chores, they'll let you become a regular-sized human again. At least that's how the first part of the game went. It's a game adaptation of a movie, and you know how those things go. Usually generic, run-of-the-mill, not too interesting. Pretty accurate depiction of this one.
Continue.
Aquaman, Battle for Atlantis. I was kinda surprised while playing this because I've heard countless times the horror stories of how abysmal this game is, but honestly after playing it I don't find this to be nearly as bad as its reception. By no means would I label it a good game though. The game's story is told via fake comic book renders, and I feel that enough speaks on its own. As the infamous Aquaman, you travel the underwater city of Atlantis, ridding of the evil invasion that intends to steal the city's riches, at least I think. It's like a fully directional beat-em-up when you're playing as Aquaman himself. Sometimes there will be additional objectives like disabling planted bombs. One mission I tried even had you in some kind of submarine battle. Yeah, I wouldn't want to revisit this one. It's not good, but there are far worse games. In fact, there's far worse GameCube games on this very list.
Continue.
Army Men Air Combat: The Elite Missions. The 3DO Company. Well, that's not something you see every day. I forgot this series started off there. Right, so in this game you pilot a helicopter to steal supplies from the enemy, take them back home, and call it a day. Lots of stuff will get in your way, however, and there are additional objectives to complete along the way. This is little more than a visual upgrade to some of those earlier Chopper arcade games. I'm sure you're familiar with them. Still, this isn't bad by any means. I especially love the tongue-in-cheek dialogue.
Continue.
Army Men RTS Real-Time Strategy. The Colonel has gone to the other side, namely the Tan? Anyways, it's a real-time strategy game, but unfortunately not a very good one. You lead your squad to the enemy bases and tell them when to fire. By the looks of things, it doesn't go far beyond what you can visually represent here.
Continue.
Army Men Sarge's War.
Bravo Company was a ragtag team of battle-hardened
Oh my god! Ew! When you actually humanize these characters, the brutality is kinda disgusting. Maybe because I wasn't expecting it? Dude, I have no idea. Anyways, this game is kind of amazing. It takes itself way too seriously, but I'm sure that was the intention for the tongue-in-cheek nature of the series. This one is far more like an actual army game. In fact, it bears a lot of resemblance to games like Mercenaries. Well, at least in the way the game handles. Here you basically just progress through short linear missions one by one, completing missions as necessary. I enjoyed it.
Continue.
Asterix and Obelix XXL, otherwise known as that game with a ridiculously impressive Game Boy Advance port. This is a PAL exclusive game, probably because Asterix and Obelix are pretty much unheard of over here. This is a platforming beat-em-up adventure title that, I have to admit, controls rather slippery. I did, however, enjoy the time playing this one. It's very simple, but has a bit of a charm to it. For some reason I got Crash Bandicoot vibes, and I'm not really sure why since they don't play the same. I guess the theming really does it for me. A shame we didn't get this one, but with them being almost entirely obscured characters over here, I guess it makes sense.
Continue.
ATV Quad Power Racing 2. I expected this to be more of an ATV racing simulation, but no, this is far more arcadey in nature. You can kick others off their bikes, go outside the boundaries of the track so long as you reach the next checkpoint. Look at this here. I mean, clearly I wasn't supposed to do this, right? I don't know, this one is weird, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't having fun.
Continue.
Modellista. I've never heard of this game before. It's a racing game that focuses more on NASCAR-esque tracks. Except get this, it's fairly arcade-like. I wouldn't expect that from this type of game, though the cell shading does give it that comic appeal, which I suppose is a bit of a giveaway. I'm having difficulty coming up with things to say about this one. If anything, I found the turning was a bit strange. You have to basically turn 2 seconds before getting to a corner, else you won't make the turn. With a little self-adjustment, this could be pretty fun.
Continue.
Avatar: The Last Airbender. The Avatar animated series is actually looked back on pretty fondly with an active following to this day, but this game is very poorly executed. Just hack and slash combat with very little depth to it.
Continue.
Backyard Baseball. This isn't terrible, it's a game clearly made for kids, and with that it does a good number of things right. A good selection of options and characters to choose from, easily learnable gameplay, it's charming in a cheap kind of way. There's still no reason for me to want to keep playing this, but I still have some respect for it.
Continue.
Backyard Baseball 2007. This one I have very little respect for. Also, attempting to catch any ball in the field is near impossible since they all spread out so far and run slower than molasses. If you have any interest in this kind of game, stick to the last one, as this isn't good.
Continue.
Backyard Football. Do you like the word Mississippi? Do you like obnoxious voices and phrases that never stop? I can only imagine how much parents hated when their kids played this one. I cannot tolerate this for long, I'm sorry.
Continue.
Bad Boys Miami Takedown. Pretty dramatic opening for this one, set up for a game that is itself pretty dramatic. I found it to be rather enjoyable once I got the controls down. You have to stand absolutely still next to a door and press the A button to open it. The same button is used to roll. It's dumb. This is a third-person shooter that has you taking down crime with your partner in crime. Seems to me it focuses more on the action of the situation rather than the development. I had fun with it, even though apparently scores for this game rank as awful. Maybe it gets significantly worse, I wouldn't know, but I'd probably keep going.
Continue.
Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. These might be the best graphics on the GameCube, so from what I gather this is a sort of dungeon crawler experience, but it has a lot more story than the usual would, and the pace has been slowed down significantly. Imagine something like a classic Zelda game and Oblivion combined. The dialogue is very well done, and I found myself getting pretty invested in what was going on in the game's world. I only hear great things about this game, and previously my only point of reference was that odd Game Boy Advance port of it.
Continue.
Barnyard. Here's another game I couldn't get to work right in the emulator, so back on over to hardware. This is another movie license game, but I've actually heard good things about this one. As the story goes, you're a male cow, which lives in a barn with the rest of the animals who have a secret. They're party animals. And they're also intelligent, so they're trying their best to blend in with typical animal behavior, disobeying these laws behind the scenes. As far as the game goes, you don't play as the protagonist of the film. Instead, you're an original cowrictor. Please don't hurt me for that, else I'll have to call my chiropractor. The game seems to consist of performing menial tasks for the animals at the barn. An overall objective seems to be missing here. From what I've heard, the missions are rather fun, however, even though on first impression it just seems alright. I mean, you can do this.
Continue.
Baten Kaitos, Eternal Wings in the Lost Ocean. Here's a JRPG. The story has something to do with going against an empire. There's clearly a lot going on here, if you're interested enough to follow along with it. There's a lot of dialogue after all. This is the kind of thing you need to invest some time into to fully grasp, so it goes undecided.
Continue.
Baten Kaitos Origins. The previous game actually starts off as a bit of a sequel story, despite it being released years prior to this one. This is, as you could have guessed, an origin story. Particularly, it goes into more detail of why they've decided to go against the Empire. The protagonist seems relatively unliked by the rest of his squad. Thankfully, he's got his friendly paramachina that I guess he stowed away or something? I'm really not sure. I imagine it'd be explained in time. Not my sort of thing, but if this prequel is greenlit, then this series must have some interesting aspects to it once you've invested.
Continue.
Batman Begins. This one played too fast on the emulator and I couldn't figure out how to give it a frame limit, so here we are on hardware again. I don't have much to say about this one. It's a linear Batman game that takes a story focus on the events of the film. Not bad, not bad.
Continue.
Batman Vengeance. This is an interesting one. I thought it to be pretty fun, but the reception seems all over the place. A lot of people say the graphics are awful, though it's based on the comic book presentation, so of course it's not going for realism. That said, the game does consist of a lot of rather uninteresting textures. Still, the presentation is fun, and the gameplay is alright. It's nothing incredible, no, and supposedly it only lasts 2 hours, but I think I'd find myself coming back to it once or twice.
Continue.
On the other hand, we have Batman Dark Tomorrow, which is one of the hardest games to control that I've ever played. I could barely get past the first rooftop scene, and apparently I'm not alone in that. Look at this here, what on earth was I supposed to do differently? The wind took me. Anyways, this is considered one of the worst, if not the worst Batman game ever to be made, so yeah, just don't bother with this one.
Continue.
Batman Rise of Sin Tzu. Nowhere near as offensively bad as the last one, but I don't really get it. It starts off so promising, honestly, but they just throw you into a city scene with quick fight after quick fight in an extremely repetitive environment. I'd say the gameplay is actually quite good, it packs a punch, but why did it have to feel so samey? The first impression of a game is really important. I can understand if things are slow to start, but if you're going to throw the same gameplay without variation for such a long time at the start, you're not going to have an easy time in persuading me to try it further.
Continue.
Battalion Wars. You've got an army, but no battle to pursue. So what are you gonna do? Of course, provoke your war-hungry leader, and boom! Instant battle. Ready in 5 minutes or less. In this game, you lead your squad to victory, but it's not an RTS as that earlier Army Men game was. This time you're a single-man soldier on foot, which you can swap between for any of the other soldiers on your side. The gameplay is composed mostly of being instructed on what to do, where to go, and you proceed as necessary, ensuring the safety of your squad all the same. It has a lot of personality behind it. There's a certain type of tongue-in-cheek charm here, which seems to be a theme with military-based games on the Cube. I guess they didn't want people taking it too seriously. The voice actors took their jobs seriously, though, to the point where it can feel a bit over the top at times.
And show me you've got the right stuff for this patrol!
But at least they're trying.
Continue.
Beach Spikers Virtua Beach Volleyball. I've heard this one has depth to it, but it seems pretty simple to me. It's a volleyball game with, I think, exclusively girl players, and some awkward hugging. The graphics are very impressive for the hardware. I guess it's easier to do that when 4 single models are the largest focus beyond the ground texture. It's a fun distraction, but would I return to it? Honestly, I'm not sure. It is what it is in my opinion.
Continue.
Beyblade V-Force Super Tournament Battle. This game has some of the best dialogue in a video game ever. if the word best means so repetitive and abysmal that it'll make you want to let it rip right into your skull. Honestly, it had me laughing the first while, but man oh man does that announcer start getting very annoying very fast. There's only so long an over-the-top performance can even be ironically entertaining. No matter how many times I pull off this transformation, this daft lad still acts like it's a miracle in session. Anyways, the game consists of playing Beyblades, except you actually get a semblance of control over them. What am I saying? You basically have full control over them.
Feel the shock of the collision!
Besides the battles themselves, the game seems entirely flat on renditions of characters that are from the anime, I guess. Honestly, the gameplay is alright, but the fact that it is constantly interrupted by transitions and I guess what you'd call transformations makes it unbearably slow. Without that, I think it'd be far more entertaining. Would I even then consider playing it past this, though? Probably not. I think a video game could be executed well with this concept, but at the very least, it wasn't for this one.
Continue.
Beyond Good and Evil. From what I recall, the people behind this one are the same folk who did a majority of the Rayman games. Visually, I can see it. Anyways, a bunch of Hylian children were separated from their parents during a war, now fending for themselves outside the battlefields in a miserable situation. Young adult Jade wishes to reunite herself and the rest with their loved ones during these desperate times. There's some other stuff going on in the story here. Extraterrestrial stuff, I'd imagine. But this is the sort of game where I'm sure you need to spend a lot more time with it to get the gist of everything. I'm not sure what else I can say about this one. Visually, it is a delight, the storytelling is immersive, and the characters are quirky and fun. This series has its fans for a reason.
Continue.
Big Air Freestyle. Probably the only game I know of where the first words I hear out of it is the F-bomb, at least in the terms of the background music that first played. And yet the back of the box says mild lyrics. If that's mild, then what's strong exactly? Well, this game has a terrible default camera. It's like they placed it on the front of a player's bike behind you. Can't see crap in front of you, which is pretty dang important in a biking game, I'd say. Thankfully, if you swap to first person, it becomes a lot more playable and, dare I even say, enjoyable. Something about making those quick turns in the mud, nearly hitting your head as you lean over, is very satisfying. Although the presentation does remain rather clunky, I must admit. Kind of funny how the game's invisible walls keep you from going off the track. Not even at any kind of punishment to the player. You can use this to your advantage in some cases, honestly. I got some pretty weird momentum at times because of this. Not the highest quality game, but fun.
Continue.
Big Mutha Truckers. I don't even know how to explain this one. It always made me curious at the store, but I had never played it until today. Basically, you gotta make a fortune, but you're a generic redneck hillbilly dude. At least depending on what character you choose to play, I don't think it matters. And this guy needs to make some connections. So you drive off to any of the nearby locations to buy, then travel back and hopefully sell for more than what you paid. Honestly, from what I gather, it's a game of stock exchange. However, for me, the most entertainment came from the radio. The absurd dialogue you hear almost sells the whole game for me.
Now calm down there, sugar bunny. All you...
Though I imagine there's only so much of that. The gameplay otherwise in getting from point A to point B is hectic, but only as hectic as you make it. If you drive like a good citizen, then nothing will really happen. If you wreck bikers or nearby buildings, then you'll come across some problems. Vehicular or financial problems, usually. I'm not sure how long a game like this would be fun for. I enjoyed it for the 20 minutes or so that I did, and if that speaks volumes to you, then good, but it doesn't for me.
Continue.
Billy Hatcher and the Giant... This is both a beautiful and an ugly game. I'm glad Sonic Team never went back to animating humans the same way they did their anthropomorphic characters, because this is pretty gross. The rest of the game looks fine though, and while I found the protagonist pretty annoying, the gameplay isn't. I haven't played that 3D platforming Super Monkey Ball game, I've only heard bad things about it, but I imagine if this was your 3D platforming Monkey Ball game, the reception would at least be a little better, maybe. Basically, you collect eggs, grow those eggs by rolling them around Katamari Damacy style, while collecting fruit to further speed up the process. You're probably curious what the story is. It involves saving chickens who were captured and locked away in golden eggs. Without them, the city falls into darkness. As you grow these eggs, you'll find larger ones which can be used for platforming challenges like making huge jumps. Or maybe you'll need to place a heavy egg on a certain platform to open a door. Otherwise, eggs can be hatched to fulfill certain objectives. Like for example, when I hatched this golden egg, I fulfilled the objective of bringing daytime back to the city. How these two things coincided, I am not sure in the slightest. This is a very weird game. A weird game that probably didn't ever need to exist, but it does, and it's fun. I'd like to take another look at this one in the future. Again, maybe.
Continue.
Bionicle. I wasn't expecting this to play like your traditional platformer, but lo and behold, it does. Each Bionicle has different powers to behold, like the red one's fire sword being one example. I'd imagine characters are rather slow to unlock, since in my play session I was only granted this one character. There isn't too much to be said here. It's a 3D platformer first and foremost, and doesn't have much in relation to Bionicles beyond the character designs and lore. I wouldn't say this is a great platforming adventure, but it's not a poor one.
Continue.
Bionicle Heroes. This is a different game entirely. It takes a bit of the same approach other LEGO games are known for, with combo systems and a one-button building mechanic, for example. Otherwise, it's a strange third-person shooter with bizarre controls and an even more bizarre camera. Like in the last one, characters have different abilities, though this time you get access to all of them pretty much right away. You control them all like they're just one character, swapping between at your leisure. Frankly, I didn't see this one as much more than a Bionicle shooting simulation, without much variety beyond that. Wasn't feeling it.
Continue.
Black and Bruised. The character introductions to this fighting game remind me of those weird inspiration stand-ups that circulated YouTube some years ago.
Now we'll see how blue your blood is. I will leave my mark upon you.
Can I ask you kind of a weird question?
So this is a boxing game that I think I feel what they were going for, but the execution is just so off. Particularly presentation. It feels so half-baked. Characters have life, but very little of it.
Scrubber!
Not impressed?
Combat has a system, but it lacks depth. The art style is fine, but feels more like a cherry on top of a mediocre yogurt cup. I think the worst part is the whole game just feels awkward.
Come on! You know you love me!
While playing it, I just felt like I should be playing something else that does this kind of thing better, like Punch-Out for the Wii. Yeah, it didn't exist yet, but, well, now it does.
Continue.
Blood Omen 2. I really like the plot for this one. Basically, humans have dominance over the vampire race as they're trying to essentially extinct them. Well, being a powerful vampire lord yourself, you can't just let them have it their way. From what I gathered, you lost the first battle, so you're back for revenge. It seems to be a fairly linear title. One of those games where I can't really think of the words to describe what it is. It's like a combat-oriented third-person platformer. Lots of that coolness resulting from your slick vampire powers.
Continue.
Blood Rain. Immediately another vampire game. This one's a hack and slash. You're a half-woman, half-vampire, and you're after some zombies, who are German, but not Nazis, since it takes place almost a decade before the Second World War. The disease has also infected other creatures and created some abominations of its own. The way this game controls is very jank. Everything feels like it's moving way too fast. I'm sure that's a part of the appeal, so I won't knock it. It's rather fun, and I would assume there are more innovative control methods later introduced. You've got some special moves like with Blood Omen, but these are more, It features very open environments where the objectives are fairly linear. Despite its oddities, I did have fun with it.
Continue.
Bloody Roar Primal Fury, a continuation of the Bloody Roar series. Outstanding graphics for the system. I can also tell there's a fairly advanced fighting system here. You're able to pull off some impressive combos. It's very intense, though I have no idea how to play. It'd require investment, which if you have the time to provide, it's worth seeing through.
Continue.
Blowout. Simply underrated. In a nutshell, something's happened to this ship and its crew is missing. Navigate through it and eliminate an alien threat. I know how this game looks, but it's really quite fun, if a bit slow. It reminds me of that one 2D side-scroller Doom mod. Basically, the map is a giant maze, and you have to find your way through while navigating its many puzzles and collecting key cards to open doors. Again, my only complaint is that it is slow. Oftentimes you'll have to trek long pathways you've already cleared to get to another place. Teleporters. It needed those. Still, I think this game is worth a try.
Continue.
BMX XXX. This game is actually banned on Twitch. Thankfully, I picked a few key moments that should be allowed on YouTube. So you get a roster of characters to choose from. Of course, I picked that girl from Wolfenstein 2. This game has a lot in common with Aggressive Inline, in which it gives you a semi-open world with lots of cool jumps to score points in. Go talk to the surrounding civilians with a task marker, and complete those objectives in a world filled with sleazy one-liners that you'd hear the likes of at a grade school playground. It's a very immature game. It's also practically broken in its physics. I mean, what is going on here?
Continue.
Bomberman Generation. There's an energy crisis, so your fellow comrades depart into space to find 6 crystals with a secret energy. Unfortunately, the evil Higgy bandits intercept on your way back, which scatters them across the galaxy. Now it's your job to find them before the bandits do. What follows is a top-down perspective platformer where you plant bombs and kick them to take enemies down, blow open pots, activate triggers, you know. It's an objective arena by objective arena puzzler that's fun enough, but not particularly unique.
Continue.
Bomberman Jetters. Emulator wouldn't boot this one for me, so I went to hardware. This is the same sort of thing as the last with the slightly altered graphical style. I'd say it doesn't look as good as the one before it, which came out in the same year as the one this one did, believe it or not. Were people really looking for more of that Bomberman action? I really dislike how long his legs are. I mean, that just looks so unnatural. Objectively, this isn't much worse than the last. I do feel its charms are somewhat lost on this one, though. Admittedly, it's a matter of perspective. Whether that's worthy of taking this one on after generations is entirely up to you.
Continue.
Note the lack of music. You have to buy it with in-game currency first. You walk pretty slowly, but that's okay because you just take out your rollerblades and go slower! It's a life simulator for fans of the Bratz toys and Bratz boys. They're weird, but everyone here is weird. Complete one objective by another, by another, by another, by another. You can shop in between if you like. There's an appeal here for little girls of its generation, but I don't know. To be honest, while I know what you're thinking, ew, what a terrible game, I do think, considering its demographic, it's fine.
Continue.
Bratz Rock Angels. They stepped up the budget to make genuinely horrific animation sequences. Assert T-pose for dominance. This is really no different from the last game. It's basically DLC. Oh, actually, turns out this one came first. So, yeah, I actually think the other did it better, which is good, since it came out after.
Continue.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer Chaos Bleeds. If you're a fan of the show, you probably have a better idea of what's going on here, because I don't. Okay, you play as Buffy who slays vampires. There's this awesome mechanic where you stab the vampires with a wooden blade, and they crumble into a pile of bones. I mean, the game's title would insinuate these are vampires, but they seem more like zombies. Maybe there's some side plot here. Anyways, you play as one character which swaps to another when the story demands for it. You then complete an objective as that character, vice versa. The combat is simple, but honestly it had no right to be as entertaining as it is. Not gonna lie, kinda enjoyed this.
Continue.
Burnout. The only Burnout game I've ever played before this is Paradise, which is an outstanding game. How about the original? Now, look, I know a lot of people are nostalgic for this game, but especially having played the sequel immediately after this one, I don't really see too much value in going backwards. I mean, it's a genuinely fine racing game, I just don't think it holds up nearly as well. It looks fine, it plays fine, the music is pretty great. Sure, it's a worthy standalone game, but is it worth going back to if the rest of the series is far superior? That's up to you.
Continue.
Burnout 2 Point of Impact. A huge improvement. The first couple minutes of tutorial seemed a bit unnecessary since it could just give you pointers during the gameplay, but it's fine. This is the perfect example of a formula that had been fine-tuned to exactly the right degree. In fact, this, to me, felt more like the developers of the original spent more time tweaking things. The maps are, however, new, as is the music. Gosh, look at that epic plane flyby. Presentation for this one is great. I especially love how the music gets louder as you boost.
Continue.
Bust-A-Move 3000. Kind of weird that when this game is loading, it just seems like it froze. No on-screen notice or anything. And that's how I feel about this package as a whole, unfortunately. It just feels like a lazy attempt to bring their Bust-A-Move series to that generation. Yes, there are some new spins on the formula, but is that it, really? It feels like a bargain Nintendo DS game, and I mean, if that's what they were going for, then is it a bad thing? I guess not. Can't help it from feeling rather generic and uninspired. There are countless games like this that did a far more impressive job a generation prior. In many cases, even their art style was superior to what are just simple animated sprite overlays.
Continue.
Butt Ugly Martians, Zoomer Doom. Shovelware. Nothing like a good racing shovelware game. Actually, no. Mostly cause, they don't usually try to do anything special. It's not like shovelware games are inherently bad. There are some shovelware games I like, but this is just a Wipeout clone. I'll give them props for the constantly switching up locatives. That was pretty interesting. But is that enough to hold the entire game up? Not really, in my opinion. It's not a bad game, it's just kind of there. No reason to pick it up over any other game of its sort.